First off, the update
Well,
from Prince
today
Edward
is
Island.
Saturday,
We're still
March
holed up here
21st.
in the house. We haven't gone out of doors. The rain is over with from yesterday, and it's a nice sunny day, but extremely windy and chilly. So it remains to be seen whether we'll get out for a walk or not today or tonight. News is good from the provincial health director, or the chief medical officer as we call her. She did a briefing earlier today, and the news is fantastic. We're still holding at 2 confirmed cases only. Both people are doing well and weathering the disease at home. There are no hospitalizations going on right now, and no new cases, and close to 200 tests have come back negative, and there's a few more in the pipe waiting to get the results back from Winnipeg. It's great news. PEI with no one hospitalized at all for the disease. A few other measures were announced today, though, and these are measures I think that a lot of the public have been waiting for some time. One of them is that they're going to put a check station at the bridge. PEI, being an island, is served by one long bridge. It's about 9 miles long, or 13 kilometers. And on the PEI side, I think, maybe both sides for all I know, they're going to have a station there where people arriving on Prince Edward Island will be stopped, screened with questions, asked where they've been, asked if they're going to self-isolate or self-quarantine for 14 days, because that's the other new piece of information today. Up until now, we've been telling people who traveled in from outside the country to just automatically self-isolate for 14 days, regardless of whether they had symptoms or not. Now we're telling the same thing to people who've traveled from anywhere in Canada to do the same. That's because most places outside of PEI, A, they have a lot more cases than we do, and B, in most of those locales, there's evidence of community transmission. So it's not necessarily only acquired on foreign soil somewhere and then brought here. It's actually being passed around in other parts of Canada. So now we've got the same caution to our citizens and residents from coming in from other parts of the country to also self-isolate for 14 days. Also, we're going to have the same questions and screening taking place at the airport for all inbound flights starting today. This is an immediate change, and I think a lot of people who live here in PEI are quite happy to see that. Probably not everybody, because you can't get everybody to agree on everything. But I know I'm happy that there's going to be an extra measure of protection, that people come to the island will realize that even though they maybe haven't been in the United States or in Europe somewhere or somewhere else, that they also now have to self-isolate for 14 days. And we all, of course, still have to continue to practice social distancing. And this will be going on for at least weeks and maybe a month or two before we start to see a perceptible change in how we're approaching this. But it's all for the better. And I think it's a great way for every single person on the planet to help out every other person on the planet. Oftentimes, if there's an election coming up, or you're voting for American Idol or whatever, you wonder if your little contribution, your vote or your call, your text message can make a difference in the big scheme of things. I'm only one person. My vote doesn't count anyway, so I'm not going to bother voting at this election. And it's hard to combat that type of apathy. But in this case, I think it's very easy to help out everybody around you, and that's to stay by yourself. And it's the easiest thing to do nothing. All you have to do to help out here is do nothing at all. You just sit home, sit tight, try to keep yourself entertained if you can, try to stay healthy if you can, get a little bit of exercise, whatever you need to do, but just don't go near other people. It's the easiest thing on the planet to do until you get lonely, and I understand that part. But if you wanted to do something really, really powerful for every other human being on the planet, it's to help be part of the solution of stopping this disease from traveling from person to person. And it's ideal, especially if you're, and some people have commented on previous posts, they're introverts anyway. And they're not really upset about this. They're being told to do what they've been doing for most of their lives in any case, because they're not socially outward folk. And that's probably easier for them to handle that. Anyway, I appreciate all the comments we got in the video yesterday. We're up around 200 views now, or a little over that, which is great. Subscribers are going up too. So that's all cool. And if I can somehow help in any way to entertain you for 10 or 15 minutes, and to keep you from over boredom, then great. And of course, if you don't like what I'm saying or you get tired of me, you can just hit the button and I'm gone. So that's even better. The average viewing time on my videos lately has been about 8 minutes from what I can see in the statistics, even though the videos themselves are longer than that. So I understand that not everybody is watching the whole thing, and probably nobody is watching all of it, and I get that. Alrighty, so just some of the comments yesterday. Adrian commented from Vancouver. We had Ryan from Duluth. We had Dan from Casper, Wyoming, who works in a large healthcare facility as a sous chef. And with all the things going on in hospitals, even if you're not a doctor or a trauma nurse or something like that, you're likely a very important figure if you're working anywhere in any hospital, nursing home, or healthcare facility, because even if you're not having direct contact with the patients, you're providing so much important service to the people who are and to the patients themselves. So it's just tremendous that there are people still willing to go out every day, probably putting themselves at a bit of risk to do this. Dan, you're one of those, and for that, I'm sure everybody thanks you. William wrote in from Pittsburgh. Place I want to go to someday because of the family history connection, but haven't been to Pittsburgh yet. Been near it. I went by to the north, went by to the south, but never through the city. But I want to do that. But William is giving a population count for Pittsburgh, a couple of million people, and he's trying to assess the amount of spread of the disease so far there and reporting on that, which is great. And then Andrew from Newfoundland, once again, talked about how Cabot Tower was lit up like it usually is at Christmas time, and other people in the city who still have their Christmas lights up are now turning them on again, just as a sign of solidarity with each other. So that's just tremendous. All right, so a couple of people, I mentioned before that I had a bit of a flying hobby, and a couple of people wanted to know a little bit more about that. So I won't belabor it too much, but just give you a little bit of a picture of the kind of flying that I used to do and the kind of activity that I still like to do around the airport. My first solo was in 2009. I'm a slow learner. I started actually training in 1993, and I trained for about a year, had about 7 or 8 hours of flying time, had my ground school all done, had my exam passed. And then my life changed, and I ran out of money for quite some time as far as money to be able to throw into aviation, so I didn't do that for several years. Luckily, when I came over to PEI around 2009 or so, I decided to try to pick up flying training once again. And sure enough, my old hours were still good. I got some credits for some of the time that I had put in before, and I was able to pick up my flying training more or less where I left off. That led to my first solo, and that was in 2009. Interestingly, it's the day Michael Jackson died, was the day of my first solo. I don't remember the date, but I know I can always look it up, either by looking at my logbook or finding out the date that Michael Jackson died. I remember getting back in my car after the solo, and sure enough, there it was on the news, the big news of the day. So there you go. Later that year, I did my first cross country, so I took a picture of myself in the plane by myself. This photograph that you're looking at now was taken over Northumberland Strait somewhere as I was on my last leg back to Charlottetown for what they call the 3-legged solo cross country that you have to do. I finally finished my license in 2012, and I did it in a Diamond DA-20, or a Diamond Eclipse, I think they call them. Anyway, that's the kind of plane I flew, and it was a plane that belonged to the Moncton Flight College. The local Charlottetown school had closed before I got finished, so I had to go over to Moncton for probably 12 hours or so and finish up. And I did my flight test over there as well in a Diamond and passed that. Of course, once I got my license, did some flying, had Neil with me a couple of times. Here's a picture of us in Debert, Nova Scotia, just after flying over to an event over there. On the way back from that flight, Neil and I were in, and not just the two of us, but my neighbor Barry was in the plane as well. And flying beside us in another airplane was Chris, and you've probably seen Chris on Neil's channel, Chris Wilkinson, and he took a photograph of us in our plane from the plane he was in, so that was kind of cool. So I did some other flying as well. With Neil, we did some around the PEI photography flying, and Neil's got more than a few. He's got a big staple of really good pictures that we've taken from the air. Another thing I like to do is what we call COPA for Kids. In the States it's called Young Eagles, but here it's COPA for Kids, the Canadian Owners and Pilots Association, which is COPA for short. We have a program where usually once a year we'll take kids from the local community and fly them for free for 15 or 20 minutes. The pilots volunteer themselves in their airplanes for one afternoon or morning and afternoon, usually on a weekend like a Saturday, and we'll fly the kids around just to give them an idea of what PEI looks like from the air, and also maybe get them interested in perhaps pursuing aviation as a hobby or even a career down the road. So it's something I really like to be involved in. I don't usually, well, I didn't at the time do the flying at all, but I worked on the ground. I did a lot of the marshalling of the airplanes, directing them around on the apron, make sure everybody was safe and stayed clear of them when the engines were running. So it allowed me to stay involved in aviation even after I really stopped doing any great amount of flying. We also had other events that have happened at the Charlottetown Airport. We've had the Vimy flight come through a couple of years back. We were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and there was a cross-Canada grouping of vintage airplanes that stopped in Charlottetown, and it was a real privilege to be around those pilots and those airplanes. And those planes actually ended up over in the UK, and they overflew Buckingham Palace during the main celebration, and they overflew Vimy Ridge itself on the exact 100th anniversary of the day. And anyone who sees footage from that day at the Canadian War Memorial at Vimy Ridge will see those planes flying overhead there as well. We've also had other interesting visitors at the Charlottetown Airport, including the Blue Angels, who came by probably 6 or 7 years ago and spent the weekend with us. And being on the air side of the airport, it gave us, me, and the other local pilots an opportunity to hang out with the Blue Angels pilots and also some of their crew. And the Blue Angels are a bunch of F-18s that tremendous planes and are really good people. So that was great to have them right in our own airport. Also traveled to Oshkosh, Wisconsin on 3 occasions in 2009, 2013, and 2015. And took lots of pictures when I was there. But being in Oshkosh for a pilot, for someone interested in aviation, is like going to Mecca. It's like the best thing ever. It's like the Yankee Stadium of airplanes. It's amazing. Probably my most memorable flight that I ever did myself in an airplane was in a World War II training aircraft. Down in the States, they call them T-6 Texans. Up in Canada, they were called Harvards, but they're always the same aircraft. And there's a place called Warbird Adventures in Kissimmee, Florida. And we were down there several years ago. And it didn't come cheap, but I had my money saved up because I wanted to do this flight. Not in the least because my father-in-law, or Neil's grandfather, flew Spitfires, Hurricanes, Tiger Moths, and other planes during World War II, and one of the planes he trained in was a Harvard. And I always wanted to fly in a plane that he flew. So this gave me the opportunity to get in the aircraft, get some training on how it operated. The instructor got in the back seat, and I was in the front seat, and away we went. And I had about an hour in Harvard, or what they call a Texan, doing some aerobatic maneuvers and everything. And it was absolutely amazing, and I will treasure that moment for the rest of my life. That particular aircraft was built in May of 1945. I remember the pilot telling me. So it did not see action, in fact, because it wasn't a fighter, but it had all the characteristics of a warplane, of a fighter, so they could train pilots in it. It was very responsive, despite the fact it's a big, heavy-looking thing, and it was big and it was heavy, but extremely responsive on the controls. So that was a lot of fun. I haven't flown for a couple of years. I sold my share in the airplane about 2 years ago. I just wasn't flying enough. It just wasn't really making economic sense to have that kind of money tied up, but only flying a little bit here and there. The good part is, even after I sold my share, all the people I was partners with in the airplane, they're still friends of mine, and I still get to go up once in a while, although probably we won't be going up for a couple of months anyway, because when you're in a small plane like that, it's pretty close quarters. So likely with all the social distancing thing, probably will be a general aviation unfriendly practice, I would say, for the next little while. So someone wanted a little bit of information on my flying, that's it. I like aviation just from even on the ground, watching planes, being around the airport, hanging out with the other pilots. I like that as much as I do being at the controls of an airplane. That's always fun, but it was never the thing for me. I was always quite content to just be in the passenger seat looking out the window, or being on the ground looking up. Just like to be around airplanes and around the people who are also in love with airplanes like I am. So that's it. That's the update for Saturday, the 21st of March. Things are going great. Got a call from a cousin of mine. I haven't talked to him for months and months and months, maybe even a year or more, and just had a wonderful chat and got caught up on some family some family situations. Everything's good. Everyone in our family, as far as we can tell, is fine and safe and well looked after. And I hope that's the same for you. I hope you're having a good, safe, cocooning experience at home, wherever you may be. When I'm done this video, I'm going back out to the study, the library, you want to call it, the cave, to finish watching some more of the auroral science seminar, basically, as from the University of Scranton in Pennsylvania. I watched it all day yesterday and most of today so far. It goes on for several more hours, and it's fascinating stuff because I'm also a ham radio operator, ham radio, the first social media, and I have a particular interest in the Northern Lights for obvious reasons that I talked about yesterday when I mentioned my book. So coming up next time, I think maybe I'll show my Radio Shack. It's upstairs. A few people have asked me to just show what kind of equipment I've got. It won't mean much to people who aren't hams, but you might find it somewhat interesting anyway. I have some logbooks and things from the good old days, and having a lot of fun up there with my ham radio hobby as well. So, as first social media, ham radio is probably one of the best hobbies you could have during something like this, where everybody's locked inside. Because ham operators have been socially isolating for over 100 years, and so it's nothing different for them. They talk on the radio, they're sitting at home or in their vehicles, they're communicating with people and maintaining their friendships without ever having to be in close contact with people. So it's, again, something that can easily be done. It's never too late to get into that hobby yourselves, of course. I'd be glad to help if you need any links. Have yourselves a great day. Maybe we'll see you tomorrow. Be well. Don't touch your face. Bye.